a crazy question, like should Black people start business? And here's what I mean by that too. I want to start the conversation on not should we, but how should we? Because, for example, I'm in Chicago, Cook County. This is the largest concentrated area of Black-owned businesses, the largest county in the country of Black-owned businesses. So we have a lot of businesses. However, we don't necessarily have a lot of power and progress with that. And one of the things I know you talked about with Dr. Claude Anderson is we need to aggregate the way we do business, meaning having more systems. Yeah. And where because is a business when some people think a business is just being independent and being where you're competing against other Black people. Hey, I got a hot dog stand, you got a hot dog stand, so we don't need to be communicating with each other because you're my competition. Right. So in my opinion, is that the type of business that's going to help us succeed when we're fighting against inflation, automation, and immigration? Or do we need to do something different with the way that we cooperate with each other?
I think you make an excellent point, and I think it could be a little bit of both. I think that you can have an environment where you have natural competition that emerges within industries, but then a lot of times industry leaders emerge that have the ability to aggregate, in a specific way. Like I'm sure there's probably 10,000 companies that try to compete with Apple, but Apple is Apple, and a lot of those little companies are still there. But Apple created something that was so powerful that thousands of people decided to just get under the umbrella of Apple and turn it into a $2 trillion company. So I agree with your point. I think that one of the challenges. Give me 1 second. Yes, ma'am. I don't know. I'm in the interview, so shut the door, please. They need an adult. Tell them I can't come. I'm in a meeting. So tell them to come back later. All right, sorry about that. That was my daughter. Kids are.
No problem. And just so you're tuned in, one of our partners with Culture Connection, he's on that bottom screen right there too.
Oh, okay. Hey, Justice Collins, how are you? Yeah. So, good to see you, brother. Yeah. So effectively, you can have an environment where there is competition, as well as some degree of aggregation and coming together. And so I would almost say that the challenge that we might have though is that if you create too much of a culture of complete independence, that where you automatically make the assumption that I'm better off if I'm doing it by myself and I own everything, then that's where you miss opportunities. Because sometimes there are times where I might do better if I go ahead and collaborate with you as opposed to trying to compete with you. So it's just like in diplomacy and war. Sometimes it's necessary to go to war. Sometimes it's better to turn your enemy into a friend. But one solution doesn't fit all situations. Sometimes you just can't. You can't be friends. You're like if we're competing over the same woman, there's not room for collaboration on that. We're gonna have to compete, right? So I think that people have to be able to make that distinction. And I have seen exactly what you're referring to, where I've seen people that are so determined to say it's mine, I own it, I'm doing what I want to do, that it becomes a type of narcissism that is very, very unhealthy for a business environment. So to your point, I agree exactly what you're saying. And I think also to ask you what you just said, which I thought was a great point, is I think that if you're teaching children at an early age about systems and development of systems and delegation and things like that, then you do sort of have those individuals that are able to discern when competition is necessary or when collaboration is possible. And they can develop systems that allow for collaboration, because sometimes we may not be able to work together because we can't even figure out how we can help each other. We can't even figure out where the synergies are, but if you can identify those things, then you're right. You are able to create a much more powerful outcome for everybody.
So I want you to, I don't know how in tune, I'm pretty sure you're very in tune with this, but a lot of people are not having these conversations right now, that there's massive food shortages that are happening because there's supply chain shortages. I mean, because in essence, we're living where a lot of people have realized that, hey, it's easier if I make money by being unemployed off of the system than it is me working a job. Like, for example, you got a lot of truck drivers that, they say, hey, I can get unemployment right now during this pandemic And I'll be better off doing that, staying at home, than I would. I would make more money doing that than I would, working a job. And the problem with that, so now we got this supply shortage, because we got shortages in truck drivers and shortages in the entire supply chain. And so to the everyday average business owner and consumer, we're going to see this stuff more so like with lack of food shortages, whether it be at restaurants, grocery stores, as well as like in real estate, for example. You got labor and lumber costs are going through the roof right now. So to do rehabs. So can you talk a little bit on do you think that, or how do you think that's going to, how can we prepare ourselves for that as business owners? Because you can be a person with $1 million, but what does it mean when there's a blackout, or what does it mean when you don't have the proper supplies that you need?
Well, I would say that, in terms of that supply shortage, I see that as a relatively temporary phenomenon that's just driven by the pandemic. The pandemic kind of threw everything off. The chip shortage. Now, the chip shortage is actually a bigger deal in that it's going to take years to really make that right. Because building facilities that can make microchips is really hard. But outside of that, the other types of supply shortages, supply of labor and things like that, I believe the government's going to fix that. I don't think they're going to leave things the way they are. The Fed's going to change some of its policies. The Congress is going to implement something that, so eventually people will go back to work. In general, though, in terms of preparing for shortages, I think one thing the pandemic does do is it lets you know how bad things, one of the ways things can get really bad really, really quickly. Yeah. And you want to be ready for that. If you, like I say, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. And a lot of people don't get ready, and then they got to get ready at the last minute. And after the fact, you're reacting as opposed to proacting, which is really just bad business in general. So proactive behavior means that even when things are good, especially when things are good, you look back and you say, okay, what are some things that could go wrong? What are some things that and if they go wrong, how am I going to survive in that situation? And that's where you put things in place, mechanisms in place, as a plan B, just in case things do go wrong. Like, for example, with my personal wealth and income and everything else, I try to make sure I have many, many streams of income. I don't tell everybody about them because I don't know who my enemies are. I don't put all my money in one location. I don't have all my money in one particular asset class. I have it, I have all different kinds of mechanisms in place, including my decision to marry a woman who is financially secure. I love her to death, but it helps that she's financially secure because all that's part of your backup plan. All that's part of your protection. That's your defense. And I think a lot of us don't think enough about defense. It's like basketball when you got players that only want to score, but they're not playing no defense. Well, you're gonna lose. So defense means literally laying out every single thing that could go wrong and thinking about what your plan B, C, D, and E is. Because when you're black, you got to go all the way to the end of the alphabet. Because believe me, the life itself is hard enough, and I think being black in America does create additional complications that you got to be aware of.
Absolutely, absolutely. What would you say about like industries that you see with all of it as this crisis, because it's creating a lot? Because crisis, I always say, look, when a crisis creates huge opportunity. Mm-hmm. And right now, it's the biggest. Right now, this is probably one of the biggest crises that we've seen, which creates one of the biggest opportunities of all time. Yep. So, what do you? So myself, I'm very actively pushing cryptocurrency. We've been pushing that since 2017. I know you're familiar with it because I heard you speak on the cryptos, especially right now. It's a great buying opportunity if you know which assets to get involved with, right? Yeah. Real estate, if you know what you're doing and how to buy stuff right now. But what would you say are some great industries that we should be looking at, not just for short-term money, but for long-term wealth?
You really, I don't think you can go wrong with a diverse real estate portfolio. I think real estate is important. Home ownership, I'm a believer in that. I know the stock market has been the number one wealth driver in the last probably 40, 50 years. Ownership of family business is a big deal in terms of legacy and establishing something that it is not. And it doesn't just start with owning the actual business. It actually starts with what kind of culture you create within your family. If you create a culture of ownership and entrepreneurship, then you kind of have economic levers you can pull that a lot of people can't pull. You don't want your only play to be, I'm gonna go big and ask that white man to give me a better job. Like that, if that's your only move,
Yeah.
Like basketball. If you only got one move, you're not going to win with one move.
Yeah.
And so I personally would say that that really we want to. I would encourage people to think about wealth building just as a culture, as a way of thinking.
Yeah.
Preservation is a way of thinking. Uh, Delayed gratification is a way of thinking, and also even the way you raise your children is part of your wealth building strategy. I'll give you an example. My mama, when I was born, we didn't have any money. My mother's 17. She gave birth to me all by herself. Like nobody was in the hospital except me and her. Like nobody was even there to visit. None of that, right? And so my mother, we lived in the projects for about 3 years, and then she married my father when I was 3, and he adopted me, and I was very happy that he did because he's a great man. And so here's the thing, right? So my mother, when she gave birth to me, she had friends, a lot of friends that had babies at the same time, and we all grew up as like play cousins, and we'd see each other every weekend and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And now here's the thing. So when we got older, I became a professor. My sister became a doctor, a medical doctor. My brother is an entrepreneur and a millionaire and everything else. And that's very different from a lot of the kids I grew up with, a lot of my mother's friends' kids. All the stereotypical stuff, drugs, death, prison, unemployment, like all that, right? And I reflected on that. I said, what was the difference? And what I realized was that my mother and father, they just had different values. They were very big on things like personal responsibility, things that are not popular, unfortunately, in parts of our community. Some people don't believe in personal responsibility. They think that's a Republican concept. No, being responsible for your life is a universal idea. They believed in education. They didn't believe in being flashy. They believed in simple, solid values, being a solid human being, being smart, making good choices, taking care of your family, things that I just don't see promoted, very heavily. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, here's the thing. Because my parents dared to be different from a lot of their friends in terms of how they raised us, that was part of their retirement plan. So you fast forward 30, 40 years, right? My parents are now senior citizens. They have a healthy retirement in place because they did the right things when they were younger. But let's say they had no money at all. They're going to be 100% good. There's nothing that they want for. With 3 children that are all doing very well financially, that are making, hundreds of thousands up to millions of dollars a year.
Yeah.
We will buy them a house. We will buy them a car. We paid off their house. We bought them a car. We bought them whatever whatever they want, they can have it. And that's because of the investment they made in us 40 years ago. So what people got to and contrast that, I want you to contrast that to a lot of families where, they got that 45-year-old son who's maybe on drugs, getting in and out of jail, who's going to mama's house to borrow $20, right? He ain't showing up to help mama. He's not saying, hey, mama, let me help you out. He's saying, hey, mama, I need you to help me pay the child support this month. Right. So how you raise your kids is critical to your long-term retirement plan. Your family is your economic base.
Absolutely.
So when they destroyed Black families and got us thinking that family is for suckers, they got us thinking like people who want to stay broke, who want to stay struggling. The lowest net worth in America actually is that of the single Black mother with children. Right there with her is the single Black man with babies mamas. Because we know child support system. I paid child support actually 18 years. It was hard. It took all my money, right? And so my point is to say that people that don't think about wealth in a holistic framework and can't incorporate and understand how family fits into that, people like that don't typically understand wealth. Most wealthy families are families, and they will stick together. Like they will, talk through a divorce type situation, not because of all the lovey-dovey parts of it. They're like, yo, if we break up the family, it's going to cost us millions, paying lawyers and the chaos. Right. So I think those who are able to be high level thinkers will get that. And I hope that everybody will kind of embrace that type of thinking instead of thinking that it's some sort of ABC 1, 2, 3 type thing where you're playing checkers. You got to play chess if you really want to get the big piece of chicken, so to speak.
Absolutely. It's interesting